I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
It was after uncovering some disturbing information about the Skinwalker Ranch owned by Robert Bigelow that I began to have doubts about the real purpose behind the MUFON Bass Project, Star Team SIP program. Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies is an aerospace company allegedly involved in discovering novel and cutting-edge space technologies and contracted MUFON in 2009 to perform UFO investigations on its behalf. That was a brief portion of an article that was written on Tuesday, February 8th in 2011, Hunting the Skinwalker. My guest this evening has been a very controversial figure in ufology. He was the former executive director of MUFON, and I remember being at my first MUFON symposium and buzzing around thinking the world was great, that we were all in this together, and it was unicorns and rainbows and people volunteering their time, spending their own money. And I remember James Carrion was there, and I remember there were people were hushed in the room, and people were looking and whispers, and I just thought, this guy's got, that is amazing that he's actually here. But the things that I heard were definitely negative, as a lot of us have heard, as I have gone through my time at MUFON, paid my dues, and luckily for me, I got out quickly because I realized the organization had a lot of problems, and there should be a lot of questions raised about it. I understood the MUFON propaganda machine, and I understood how serious they were when it came to discrediting people who go against the narrative. That is my guest tonight, who has raised some important issues, and the more I learn, the more I dig and understand the intelligence community, the infiltration of different UFO organizations decade after decade, the more I understand that this subject, we need to look at this with some clarity, because yes, we are being fooled yet again, and we are simply not getting a clue. But James Carrion will help us understand a little bit of all of this tonight. He is an IT security manager for a large defense contractor in Northern Virginia. James's passion is researching Cold War history. He has written 2 books, which we will talk about later tonight. He has done extensive research on Roswell and talks about some of the Cold War origins of the UFO sightings through the lens of a forensic analysis. And he is the former, as I mentioned, international director of MUFON. He negotiated and signed the infamous Bass MUFON agreement that later revealed to be part of the DIA's ATIP project. James believes that there is life in the universe, and although open to the possibility, has seen no definitive evidence that intelligent life has visited planet Earth. Thank you, James, for being here. You know that I've wanted to get you on for some time, and I have found your story and everything that you have been through a breath of fresh air, especially given what I went through as well. And I understand that, you've really stood up against, there have been some serious allegations with regard to your character with all of this. And I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you for taking the time on your Friday evening.
Thank you for having me on the show, Erica.
Absolutely. And so there's so much to talk about, but I want to just let people know, give people a little bit more of your background. How did you first become involved in looking for UFOs or extraterrestrial intelligence?
Wow. Pretty much all my life, I've had an interest. Interestingly enough, it started probably around age 11. My mom used to subscribe to all the tabloid magazines. And, of course, front page news back then in the tabloids was alien abductions and UFOs, and just fascinated me. So I started clipping out those front page news articles and just kept them in a folder and thought, one day I'm going to have to take a look at this and really try to figure what this is all about. But I sort of put it aside, and, after joining the military, I'd pretty much forgotten about UFOs. And when I got out of the military, which was a 4-year stint in the Army, I just happened to be living in Tallahassee, Florida at the time. And I heard mention of a MUFON symposium that was going on in Pensacola, Florida. And so I decided to look up the organization and find out what they were about. I didn't really join at that time. It actually took me moving out to Colorado in 1996 before I actually joined the organization. And once I did, it intrigued me even more, because here I was watching this organization of folks that were, obviously most of them rational and not crazy like a lot of people would think, folks that have an interest in UFOs are. And I got to know John Schuessler, who was the international director at the time. And again, this just increased my interest, because I kept thinking to myself, well, why are so many people interested in this? Why are there professionals, folks with PhDs? Why are they involved in this? I mean, we have these UFO conferences, UFO symposiums. I don't see anybody having a symposium or a conference on leprechauns or fairies, but yet this UFO subject seems to be still in the mind of not only the public, but of interest to serious researchers. So that's what really got me involved.
And so you got to know John Schuessler and some of the other people that were involved at the time. Can you give me a bit of background on the other people that were involved, specifically on the MUFON board of directors?
Oh, sure. So it was a couple years after I joined MUFON that John Schuessler moved to Colorado himself. He was retiring from NASA, and he took over the international director role from Walt Andrus. And he established the MUFON headquarters down in Littleton, I think it was. So I would go down there, and I would meet with John and have lunch with him and talk with him about what his beliefs were. And it was so vivid, the memory of sitting in a little coffee shop across from MUFON headquarters when I posed to John the question, well, John, now that you've been involved in this subject for so long, what do you think is really going on? And his response just floored me. He basically said, I don't know. And that just threw me for a loop, because I thought, well, wait a minute. Here we have the director of the organization who's been involved researching this subject for so many years, yet he's not able to establish any conclusions about what's going on. So again, just intrigued me even more. And around the same time, I was, as I was looking at through MUFON headquarters, they had file cabinet after file cabinet full of their case files, their historical investigations. And, being in the IT world, I thought, it would be awesome if we could just digitize these and put them online. So I proposed to John that we set up a project for that, which became known as the Pandora Project. And the MUFON board, blessed the project financially, and we went ahead and digitized all those files. And then around that same time, I was invited to join the board of directors. So back then, if we look at who was on the board, there are folks like Tom Dooley, Tom Whitmore, John Schuessler, Clifford Cliff, Robert Switek. Those are the board members and some of them are still on the board. Jan Harzan, obviously, who's now the international director. So there's sort of been a continuity of personnel going way back then, which was around 2004 to 2005 till now. Some of the board members are no longer there, but some of them are still there. And of course, Jan is now the head of the organization.
And so have you been following things with regard to MUFON and some of the dramas that are taking place, the decline in membership, and now, and I'm sure, I don't know if you know this, but now Jan Harzan's push is to buy all the files, to sweep up all the data and put it in the black pit of despair so nobody will ever have access to it. Have you been keeping up on that?
I sort of, I definitely, every time there's an article put out in the UFO community that has to be, that's either pro or con MUFON, I do keep track of that. Honestly, I think they're probably, if we look at the organization, We haven't seen much progress since I left the organization in terms of change in probably membership roles or just trying to stick to their mission of scientific investigation. So you mentioned purchasing UFO historical files and then ending up in sort of a black hole. Well, that's what MUFON was always known for, which is something I tried to reverse when I was the director, which is why I wanted to digitize all the files and as much as possible make them public. Now, of course, you can't just take a UFO investigation and throw it online. There's witness information. There are folks that want to remain anonymous. There's privacy information. Of course, those are things that would have to be, someone would have to go through and censor that information before they release the information publicly. But there's been plenty of time to do that. So the fact that all this information just sort of sits there and nothing's done with it just rubs me the wrong way. I know that you can see their latest, counts of sightings, and there are certain sightings that you can view online through CMS, and that's all great. I think, though, the big problem with MUFON, and this is not, me being anti-MUFON or anti that organization, I just think they're failing at their mission. And what I mean by that is you can spend all day, year after year, gathering data, gathering information, and storing it. But what good does it do you if you don't process that information? You don't actually do scientific analysis on that information. You don't put researchers and data scientists to start looking at the data and trying to figure out, what does this data really tell you? They've never been able to do that. So it's really just a big landfill of UFO information, which they keep dumping into, but it doesn't really serve anybody's purpose.
And so what were the years for Pandora? Like, what years did that span?
So that project started, I believe, around 2000, 2002, maybe. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but yeah, somewhere around there. Definitely the files had been almost fully digitized by 2006, 2007 timeframe, because we actually then divided them up by the state of origin, and we gave each state director copies of all the files, all the previous historical files for their state.
Wow. And so, I mean, and that isn't available. What happened with, you wanted to make this push to get information forward and to get that out there, but what was the holdup in all of that?
I'm not sure. I mean, again, the files could be made public. A lot of them are very old. The witnesses are probably no longer around. And if somebody just spent enough time going through and taking out any privacy data, they could be put online. So it may just be an issue of resources, not having enough resources to do that, or it just seems to be hoarding of information at this point.
Yeah, it's very curious, and I've heard you talk about on other interviews the intelligence community and the way it weaves itself, into ufology and into some of these organizations. And give us a little bit of background on what you have learned over the years with regard to the intelligence community and UFO organizations.
Sure. Well, when I joined MUFON, the intelligence agencies were not even on my radar. I was thinking more along the lines of, okay, here's a real mystery. Let me try to figure out what this mystery is about. So I approached it from the point of view that, I have to have an open mind. I have to be skeptical at the same time. And, what is this all about really? Why are folks claiming they're being abducted by aliens? Why are people seeing allegedly all these strange high performance craft flying around the atmosphere? So really, I took a nuts and bolts approach to it. Again, not even thinking about where the intelligence agencies fit into that. The problem was that as I started doing research and started, especially when I became international director and started meeting different folks in the field, the more I started to feel that there was a very heavy element of human deception across the board. From different cases I was researching to people that would pop in that seemed to be strange and have strange motives, or their backgrounds didn't pan out, or they were offering things to MUFON that didn't pan out. Financial benefactors, for example. This was even before Bigelow came along. And as I started looking at all this different activity happening, it just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception. But deception of a human nature. So that's when I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies and what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology. And I just sort of, gathering data and from experience, just sort of formed this hypothesis about why these different elements are involved.
It's curious to me because I've spent time with one of my dear friends, is Gordon Lohr, and Gordon Lohr was an investigator for NICAP, and was there back in the late 60s, and he talked about, the fact that they felt that their phones were being tapped, that there were intelligence officials coming in and asking about specific cases, and they were so concerned that they decided to take some of the reports off site and then Xerox them and make sure that they could get into safe hands. Which is it's fascinating to me, and yet people aren't paying attention to this, and the fact that, yes, there is a definite need to control the narrative for multiple reasons. What do you feel some of the most important reasons to control the narrative are?
Well, I think that depends on which decade we're in. So, I've done a lot of historical research on the UFO subject going back to the 40s, all the way from the very beginning of the modern era with Kenneth Arnold, and even before that, the ghost rockets. And I think the rationale for why intelligence agencies were involved back then is different than why they were involved in the 50s. It's different than why they were involved in the 70s and so on. So I think what's happening is that, as time progresses, the intelligence agencies use this field for their own purposes, and they have their own motives for doing so, but the rationale behind that changes, and it's also evolving. So let's take, for example, the two books I wrote. One was Anachronism, which had to deal with the ghost rockets of 1946, and then the Roswell Deception, which picked up where Kenneth Arnold had a sighting all the way through Maury Island in 1947. Those very specific years, 46 to 47, intelligence agency involvement, from my perspective, based on my research, had more to do with the beginnings of the Cold War, had everything to do with this new enemy that popped up after World War II, which was Soviet Russia, and how we could counter that, Stalin and his forces, given that we had no real human intelligence on the ground to be able to do that in their country, because it was so closed off. So that would have been rationale for that time frame. If we take, for example, the 1950s, just take for example, in 1952, when they had the UFOs over Washington, and then the Robertson panel came out in 1953, which is very interesting in itself because the Robertson panel, which was sponsored by the CIA, said, hey, we're really worried about the subject of UFOs, not because we think it's real, but because we think our enemy, aka the Soviets, could use this subject to have a surprise attack on the United States. And they could clog the channels of communication with people reporting UFOs when in fact it was a secret attack. So they were worried about how to counter that. So out of the Robertson panel came these recommendations of, well, we have to try to debunk the subject for the public, and also we need to infiltrate UFO organizations because they seem to be a hotbed for counterintelligence. Which, if you look at the time frame for that, it's very interesting because after Robertson, a couple years later, is when NICAP formed, one of the first UFO organizations, and lo and behold, they were inundated with former CIA personnel that were on their board of directors, that was involved in their membership recruitment. So you almost see this continuity of from the Robertson panel to NICAP and the rationale for why ex-CIA employees would be involved in that organization. If you move forward to the 80s, we have Roswell, the resurgence of Roswell, and then the Majestic 12 documents that came out after that. So, that could have been a whole different rationale for why the intelligence agencies were involved. Some of it could be very mundane. I mean, sometimes I think that that ufology is just a proving ground for disinformation techniques, for training intelligence personnel. Before you send them off to a foreign country to deceive the enemy, why don't you put them inside of a UFO organization or have them attend a UFO conference or create mythology? Because if you can manipulate the human mind here, you can manipulate the human mind somewhere else. So I think we see this evolution of modus operandi as well as motivation.
And I absolutely agree with you. And it's been interesting for me to watch all of that. And, you talk to some people and they have such a hard time believing this. I mean, they would say things like, oh, maybe back in the 40s and 50s that happened, but that's not happening now. But I mean, that now it is so much easier because now you've got the internet, you've got social media, you can get in and influence people with one comment. And it's absolutely amazing that people aren't getting that fact. And it's scary.
And I think there you can see even the continuity there, just what you mentioned about the social network information manipulation. I started seeing that early on, before all these big social networks started up, within the UFO community, on these chat boards where people were putting forth this information about certain sightings or for example, we had these infamous cases that would somehow come back into the public eye that when you started doing in-depth investigation on them, they didn't pan out, but they were being promoted online on these social chat boards. And you start seeing the beginning of information warfare and how people can be deceived. I even wrote an article on my blog right after WikiLeaks went public, and I said, it's time to be suspicious of WikiLeaks because the techniques they're using, this online manipulation that I was seeing was very similar to what I was seeing on UFO boards. So it started making me think that, ufology is a proving ground for the intelligence community before they start using those tools on a wider basis.
Well, and absolutely, and they can seed ideas and just watch them grow. And I mean, it is a perfect place. And I just, people don't understand the gravity of that situation. And I keep trying to, when I'm talking with people, it's like, please get off social media. You don't need to be in there all the time. These groups are pulling you in. They're getting your data. Half the time you don't know who you're talking to at the other end, and it's a really, to me, it's very dangerous, and we need to be aware of that. And I'm glad you feel, you've seen that over the years and with your in-depth research.
Well, it's extremely dangerous, but I think at the same time, because I spend a lot of time on Facebook, sometimes there are certain posts that just trigger you. You can't help it. It creates this emotional response where you feel like you have to respond because it's either something that's outrageous or goes against what you believe, or there's a counter narrative being put forward, whether it's political in nature or something else. And the thing is, you don't know who you're really arguing with online. It could be some guy sitting at Langley. It just as well could be some Russian troll sitting in St. Petersburg. You don't know who you're dealing with, but you are being manipulated. And the question is, are you able to catch yourself in that manipulation and either extricate yourself from it, otherwise you're just going to fall deeper into it.
Right, and thank you so much for putting that so eloquently. It is really important. I'm Erica Lutz here at James Carrion. We will be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified. UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Paranormal radio never sounded so good. Love, light, and the paranormal. Hosted by Reverend J. Live every Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Right here on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
No mercy, no pity, no fear.
Come explore the world of the paranormal with distinguished and sometimes not so renowned authors, investigators, as well as TV and radio personalities from around the world. Whether it's love and light or the darkness of the abyss.
This is insanity!
We go down the road others are afraid to travel. The only question is, are you ready for it? Love, Light, and the Paranormal. Hosted by Reverend J. Live Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Your paranormal voyage starts here.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
evidence that you're not alone.
You said my name. What is your name?
Proof that the living and the dead coexist. Or do they? Every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, join writer, producer, and paranormal investigator Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio as he explores, interviews, and investigates evidence alongside some of the best in the paranormal community and beyond.
6 people killed.
Ghost Box Radio, Wednesday nights exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, because the dead don't sleep. Ghost Box Radio.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here from the Fenton Files to tell you how to watch UFOCon 2020, which was held right before the virus scare and shelter in place. It was a conference like no other, so don't miss out on the specially priced on-demand replay of what is already the most talked about conference of 2020. Visit UFOCon2020.com. That's UFOCon2020.com.
You ready to go? It's showtime!
Here we go, world.
You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I hope all of you are safe and healthy, and I'm sending you my love. I know we're living through very scary times at the moment, but I'm glad that we can spend Friday evenings together. I want to thank you for your love and support as well. I'm here tonight with someone who has spoken out about several different things, one including Skinwalker Ranch, which we are going to talk about because, as you know, for those of you who listen to me and follow my work, that has been very important, especially over the past few months, given some of the things that are coming forward with testimony from people that worked for Bigelow and questions about human testing and the implications there. So we're going to talk about that. James Carrion is with me, and he is the author of 2 books, Anachronism and the Roswell Deception. I love the Roswell Deception, and that chronicles the Cold War origins of early UFO sightings. And it is important, when people are looking at this subject, you have to look at the history. You have to understand our vulnerabilities. You have to understand where the intelligence community is seeding ideas and thoughts, where it's going. I can't stress that enough, especially right now with some of the things taking place with To the Stars and quote unquote disclosure that I hate to tell you is not really happening, but that's another story. So we'll talk about that. But James, welcome back to the show. Thank you for agreeing to be here. It really means the world. We were talking, you were talking about the 40s, the ghost rockets, the Robertson panel, and then the infiltration of NICAP and some of these things in the first part of the show. And then we were mentioning the chat boards and how you could see from your perspective how this could be used for info warfare, which I absolutely agree with wholeheartedly. And I want to just go back to your time at MUFON, because this is, and I'm going to lay the groundwork for some things. But when you became the executive director, give us the time frame and tell us what happened with regard to Robert Bigelow and him coming in and wanting to purchase the database.
Sure. So I became international director. It was called international director at that time in the 2006-2007 timeframe. And I had no interaction with Bigelow during those first couple of years. In 2007, I sponsored what was called the Meeting of the Minds Conference. This was something I personally financed. I brought some top UFO researchers to Fort Collins, Colorado, for a couple of days over a weekend, so we could sit down and sort of discuss the state of ufology. And we had Richard Dolan was there, and John Schuessler, and Stanton Friedman, a couple of social scientists, and one thing that we sort of bantered about were different hypotheses for what UFOs was behind UFOs. Everything from the extraterrestrial hypothesis to the human deception hypothesis and so on. And there were no conclusions that came out of that meeting, but we did at least put together a framework for future research, which was important to me. Trying to understand if there's data, where does this data fit? You have to have an hypothesis in order to be able to make sense of your data. So again, this was just, everyday MUFON, nothing new, nothing different, no Bigelow. But then in 2008, what happened was we had Bigelow approach. Actually, let me take one step back, because in 2008, I was also involved with a TV show. The Discovery Channel did a 3-episode series called UFOs Over Earth. And talking to the producer, I said, hey, I just heard about this ranch in Utah called the Skinwalker Ranch. The book has been written about it. I think it would probably make a great episode. Why don't we ask Robert Bigelow if he'll let us in on the ranch and film one of the episodes? So I called Bigelow up, and he said, basically, no. I don't want you on the ranch. I don't want the publicity. We have too many crazies coming around to the ranch now with all this publicity from the book, and we don't want to exponentially increase that, which we think will happen if, it's on the Discovery Channel. So I said, okay, fine, not a problem. So that was sort of my first interaction with Robert Bigelow. This was mid-2008.
I want to just, and sorry to interrupt you here, but I just wanted to point out, it seems absolutely insane to me that he's complaining about, getting people on the ranch or too much publicity when he allowed Colm Kelleher and George Knapp to write that book about the ranch. I mean, what was he thinking there?
Exactly. I think you're making a very good point, which is, if you don't want the publicity, why are you allowing this person, Kelleher, who was involved with your organization, to put out this book with George Knapp? It seems almost like you want the publicity after all, just controlled publicity. So, again, at the time, I was too involved with the show and with other duties not to worry so much about that. But then towards the end of 2008, John Schuessler, who was still on the MUFON board, came to me and said, hey, I have this very interesting proposition from Bob Bigelow. He wants MUFON to be more involved with an organization he started up called BASS. BASS was basically the successor organization to a former Bigelow organization called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, which was involved heavily with, allegedly, investigating the Skinwalker Ranch, doing scientific investigations. And John said, I think this is a real good opportunity for MUFON. So remember, MUFON being a sort of poor boy organization, always looking for some benefactor or funding, thought it would be a good idea. Bigelow originally asked us to put together some scientific papers, which you probably saw a recent article from a couple of gentlemen who then released the details about that and what scientific papers MUFON produced for Bigelow. This was in late 2008. And after we delivered those papers, which I personally delivered to Bigelow in Las Vegas towards the end of that year, right after that, again through John Schuessler, Bigelow said, hey, we want to now expand the MUFON role. We'd like to use your investigative force to gather data because we're very interested in what UFO data or UFO materials recovered can do for aerospace science. We think that maybe it can lead to some incredible breakthroughs in propulsion, in gravity manipulation and lift, whatever has to do with aerospace or aerospace craft. And again, we thought, okay, not a bad idea. Let's go ahead and do that. But the amounts of money that were being bantered about were pretty big numbers. And at the time, I thought, well, wait a minute, whose money is this? Is it Bigelow's money? I mean, he's a billionaire, given he can probably finance that amount of money, but let me find out for sure. So I asked John, who's behind this? Is it Bob Bigelow, or is it somebody else? And he said to me, well, Bigelow has a sponsor. The sponsor's putting this money up. And I said, okay, well, who is the sponsor? And John said, I can't tell you that. That's confidential information. It's between me and Bigelow. He let me know who the sponsor was, but he told me not to tell anybody else in the organization. So that sort of struck me as odd, as would anybody. And I thought, okay, well, either there is another billionaire out there that doesn't want their name known, which is not unheard of. For example, MUFON did a project called the AMP project, which was called stood for the Ambient Monitoring Project. This was a UFO abduction related research project where they created these little sophisticated boxes that had lots of electronic gear in them that measured the environment, temperature and gravity and vibration and any number of other parameters. And they gave these boxes to volunteers who were claiming to be abducted and said, put these in your home, hide them somewhere, because it just looked like a little wooden box. You couldn't tell there was electronic gear inside. And they were told to keep these boxes running 24 hours a day. And every time they felt like they had an abduction experience, to journal about it. Because the thought was that this box is collecting all this data, and using the journal as sort of a guide, whenever somebody says, I thought I was abducted last night, we can then take a look at the data collected that same night and see if there was anything different that happened within their environment. So, obviously that costs money. It was a sophisticated project. And the person who put that money up, I won't mention who their name is, but they're a real person, and they have lots of money, and they obviously sponsored it, but they wanted to do so anonymously. So from my experience, I thought, okay, this is not unheard of that somebody wants to remain anonymous, and I was trusting John's judgment that if he knew who the benefactor was, that, I just need to trust John's judgment. Now, again, I still wanted to make sure that I covered all my bases. So when we did end up meeting Bigelow in person in Las Vegas in January of 2009, I point blank asked Bob Bigelow, who's behind this project? Is there a government agency behind it? And he said, no. So we do know now, many years later, the sponsor was a government agency, was the Defense Intelligence Agency, and basically Bigelow lied to my face. Now, I still can't reconcile that John knew this and somehow didn't let us in on that. It almost seems to me like maybe he was misled as well. Maybe he didn't know it was the DIA, and he was told a lie that it was somebody else. I don't know. Somebody just needs to sit down and ask John if he's willing to divulge that information. But I do know that I was lied to.
And so did anybody else, on the board? I mean, were they suspicious or asking questions about this, or were they just happy that there were funds coming in?
No, I think everybody was suspicious, and we would discuss this within our board meetings. And again, it would go back to, okay, John is assuring us that it's a known person that's not suspicious, and Bigelow is telling us it's not a government agency. So between the two, we sort of thought, okay, it should be fine. And you may have seen this in the article that was recently put out by Roger Glassell, I think was his name.
And Kurt Collins, yep.
Right, because there was an email exchange that happened between myself and another board member, where that board member asked the same suspicious question: how do we know for sure this is not a government agency? And I wrote back then, and was released in the article, well, again, we have John's assurances and we have Bigelow's assurances. So John, I'm not sure whether or not John, from my perspective, John's super honest guy. I've always had a lot of respect for John. I still do. So I don't think he would have lied to the board, but Bigelow definitely lied to the board. And that really doesn't sit well with me.
No, and then you've got the whole aspect of the fact that there's private information. I mean, personal details that are being put out there. And I know right during the time frame when all of this took place, didn't MUFON amend what was being put forward when people were putting the witnesses out or putting their reports online? To there's a third party. Do you authorize a third party to have access to this information?
Yes, and actually that was done at our request, MUFON's request, because we were worried about liability. We didn't want to just release information given to MUFON from the public to BASS without having some sort of legal clause that says this is an authorized release, which is why it was added to the CMS online form that if you check this box, you are releasing information to third parties. Being BASS. Now, somebody could have not checked it, and then it would not have gone to BASS. So it sort of gave them the out. It was a voluntary thing.
Okay, right. Covering your bases. That's absolutely. And so, when Bigelow, said that MUFON that he wanted the data for aerospace engineering. I mean, in retrospect, how consistent is that with the way that he interacted with BASS, interacted with MUFON, and would he perhaps actually be after something else?
Yeah, so the relationship, which started around April of 2009 and ran till January of 2010, it had its hiccups for sure. I mean, there were times when MUFON investigators would get to a particular case, and the witnesses would tell them, "Oh, we already had BASS investigators here," so somehow they got there before MUFON did, or sometimes BASS would just go places and not tell MUFON they were there. For example, just recently I found out, this was from an article that Keith Basterfield, I believe his name is, wrote just recently about BASS going down to South America, going down to Brazil, and trying to get information and data from Brazilian ufologists. This was in 2009 when the MUFON-BASS relationship was in place. And they could have let us know that they were down there seeking additional information, but they didn't. So they were being very secretive about certain things, only interacting with us on the things that involved data that MUFON was providing them.
And that is interesting. And so when cases came into the CMS during that time period, who was it that was specifically getting the first view and then assigning the cases at that point?
There was a very specific system that was put in place for this. So it involved the type of case. So we were using the Jacques Vallée classification system, which most folks will know from the movie Close Encounters, right? So Close Encounters of the fourth kind or the third kind, or however you want to classify it. So we were looking for only cases that were of a certain category. They had to be of a high category, something exceptional. It could be not just somebody saw something fly by. It would have to be something like a UFO that landed, a UFO that created some sort of effect on a human or an animal or on the environment. Something that would actually involve collection of data, not just reviewing a fuzzy video or anecdotal data. So we first had to evaluate the cases coming in to see which ones were of a high enough category to warrant the STAR team, which is what the MUFON Rapid Investigative Force was called at that time, to be put out to the field, boots on the ground, to investigate it. So there were folks monitoring the CMS constantly. These were paid operators, and when they saw a certain case come in, they would then immediately notify the operations manager, who would then reach out to the state director for that state and say, "Hey, we have a high category case come in. We'd like to deploy the STAR team. Are you okay with that?" So there were some political things that had to be maneuvered as well, so people didn't feel like their toes were being stepped on as the STAR team came in and started to do these high-level investigations.
And it is interesting because I was just talking to somebody yesterday who was involved with MUFON at the time, and they were involved, with all of this, and they talked about different cases, two specific cases, where they had some pretty significant reports, and that before they were able to get there, these people, men in black, let's call them, like they would step in and they would take all the evidence and, by one account, intimidate the witness so that they didn't want to speak with MUFON investigators.
Right. So there was some of that going on. They were probably not men in black. They were probably BAS investigators.
Right. Well, but I think that, I think from what I'm hearing, it seems to me that there was one in particular person that fancied himself a man in black. So. Oh,
I see. Did he drive a black Cadillac?
I'm sure he did. Yeah, the Cadillac Escalade. I mean, I'm telling you, seriously. But it is interesting because there were some significant sightings, over Lake Erie, and things, and some of these people were involved to go out there and kind of spread disinformation and do what they were going to do. And my thought is, did they do that because this was truly ET, or did they do that because they were worried about there was some sort of government testing that they were trying to make sure stayed out of the hands of the public?
Sure. And if I had to looking back now at that whole MUFON-BAS relationship, I think probably a certain element of why the relationship was started was to control the flow of data, to control the narrative, to control MUFON, actually, because our rapid investigative force, the STAR team, was founded before the MUFON-BAS relationship. So we had already created this team of putting people on the ground quickly in certain areas where there was a high-profile case. Now, if you just think about it from, let's take it from the Air Force's perspective. So if you're the Air Force and you're responsible for, let's say, the high-tech development of the next futuristic stealth aircraft, the last thing you want to do is have one of your stealth prototypes crash, and the first people to arrive there be some amateur UFO investigators. So I think there was some level of concern about, what is this rapid response force going to do, and how is it going to be problematic, and maybe we should have some level of control over that.
And since you put it that way, that could be kind of a debacle, having a couple of those people may go to the scene first. I don't even know what to think about that. That's makes me giggle. Thank you for the good laugh. But it is interesting, and there's so many questions with all of this, and I have a hard time. I think the more I learn, really thinking that a lot of this is involving ET. Or really UFO research is just a big disinformation game and psychological operations and Lord knows what they're doing. But it's truly, I don't know. Do you just scratch your head now when you look back at all of this?
I don't really scratch my head as much as I am worried that we'll never get to the truth of a real core phenomena, because I think a lot of people misunderstand my perspective on all this. They think because I wrote these books that were, about the early days of UFOs, and I believe were more Cold War related and human deception than actual UFO activity, they sort of believe like I'm some arch debunker, which I'm not. I'm very open-minded. I'm just skeptically open-minded, and I have to say that even when I was in MUFON or before that, I came across certain investigations that I really had to scratch my head and say, well, I can't say this is human deception, right? There's something very high and very strange to this. So it's going to be in that category of the unknown, the mysterious. So, and, we also have to just be open-minded from the point of view that, statistically speaking, there's life in the universe, right? There has to be life in the universe. The big question is, has that life actually visited us? Is it plausible that we've had visitation in the past, the present, and we'll have visitation in the future? Absolutely. I absolutely think that's possible. So I don't say that all activity that's UFO related is of human deception or obfuscation. But what I do say, and I've said this religiously throughout the years, is we'll never get to know what is real and what's not, as long as these intelligence agencies are constantly muddying the waters And they're constantly involving themselves into creating mythology, and they're involving themselves into penetrating the organization, or they're trying to create havoc within this investigative realm of ufology. I always think back to that. I was a big X-Files fan, and that one X-Files episode, I can't remember the name of it, but I love it because it so emblemizes what I'm just talking about. It happened this episode started off with this couple. They were driving down a country road, and this UFO came down and abducted them. And as they were being abducted by these little gray aliens, another UFO came along with a different race of aliens and abducted the grays and the old couple. And fast forward in the episode, and all of a sudden the gray aliens and the old couple are in cages, and the gray aliens pull off the mask, and they're Air Force personnel.
Right.
So what I'm getting at is that, yes, it's very well possible there's a real phenomena, and there's very high strange and even possible visitation from somewhere else. But how are we going to get there if the waters are so muddied and full of so much bad information? Some of it that's purposely put there, some of it that's there because people have a hoax motivation or a money motivation or ego motivation for perpetuating bad information.
Absolutely. It's really important. And I unfortunately, and I really feel that in the United States that this is, I don't believe that there's any other country that has the kind of nonsense going on that we do. So, and what do you think about that? We've got a couple minutes to break, but do you think that it is as bad in other countries?
I don't think so. I think probably in some other countries, there's critical thinking is taught in schools, and so I think they're less susceptible to this. Here in the U.S., we seem to be highly susceptible for some reason to these conspiracy theories, and it doesn't even have to be UFO related. I mean, you can look at this QAnon conspiracy craziness that's going on to know that people can be swayed pretty much by anything that's labeled a conspiracy.
Absolutely. Thank you for those wonderful words. I'm Erica Lukes here with James Carrion. We're going to take our longer of the two breaks. Make sure you go to UFOclassified.com. Check out the upcoming shows and other research. I'll be putting more and more about Skinwalker Ranch on my website as the days go on. You'll really love it. So anyway, stick around. The best is yet to come.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizzell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I want to thank all of my listeners from all over the world for supporting my show, and I'm noticing every week I am getting more and more support on social media, and people are understanding that there is a bigger picture to what took place at Skinwalker Ranch, that there are people involved in this who are trying to muddy the waters, steer the narrative, and they're not doing so for the greater good of mankind, and it most certainly has nothing to do with disclosure. So we are really at a critical time right now, and I'm grateful that the people that listen to my show can use their critical thinking skills. It's amazing. So anyway, thank you for your support. You can go to UFO Classified to contribute, to look at any of the articles I'm going to be putting out, and some new Skinwalker Ranch photographs, reports, all sorts of good stuff. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'm here with James Carrion, who's an IT security manager for a defense contractor, and he has been researching UFOs and looking at the history from the Cold War on. He's written 2 books, Anachronism and the Roswell Deception. And you can, James, where can you find your books?
They are freely downloadable from my blog, which is historydeceived.blogspot.com. Or if they just Google for the title, there's a couple of different places they can download them for free.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. And I was so worried because, you had Follow the Magic Thread. I mean, you had, it just seemed like your blogs disappeared. And I was kind of frantic there for a moment. So that's great. Thank you for telling me that I can find more of your work online. And I think that's important for other people too, especially younger people who are getting into this, and they're starry-eyed like we once were, and looking to Tom DeLonge and certain people for answers, and I think it's good that we've got grounded information. And you also, in the last segment, I want to say, clarified that you are not a diehard skeptic, that you're actually grounded and you understand that there's more to this that deserves to be looked at. So thank you for that. And I want to get back into and kind of weave back into Skinwalker Ranch and some of the things that were taking place with Bigelow. And there's a lot of controversy around that time frame. And as you know, people on the board of directors were accusing you of some embezzling money and lots of nasty things. At what point during all of this did you see that tide was changing, and that things weren't right, and you were going to be kind of painted as the villain in all of this?
Well, to be completely honest, I sort of knew early on that I had better protect myself, because I sort of go into the MUFON-Bass relationship. It didn't take very long after it started off for me to start feeling that something wasn't right. And it was just sort of a gut feeling, and I usually follow my gut. And so my gut was telling me, be careful and protect yourself. So it's almost laughable that folks within MUFON, after I left, were talking about financial impropriety, because it was completely the opposite. When we had our 2008 symposium out in California, the symposium didn't make enough money to cover all the expenses. So I ended up fronting out of my own pocket $12,000 to the organization. And after that, and when the MUFON-Bass relationship started up, part of the contract and part of what Bigelow wanted was that all the positions would be funded, including my position. So I was supposed to take a certain salary each month from the MUFON-Bass contract for overseeing the contract. I decided not to, because I sort of felt like I better not take this money, because until I have a real good understanding of how this relationship is going, and feeling comfortable about this, I'm not going to accept money that I feel could be possibly tainted. So I didn't take the salary. I ended up donating it back to the organization. And I had to fight, excuse me, after leaving the organization, I had to threaten the organization legally just to get the money back that I had fronted for the symposium in San Jose. So for them to accuse me of embezzling money is laughable, given that I had to bail them out when the organization didn't have enough money to cover expenses. And I took money that I probably should have rightfully taken as a salary, and I donated it back to the organization. So I kind of laugh at that, because it's unfortunate that They knew this. So I don't know why rumors were being spread around that I had somehow taken money.
And so who was behind all of that?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think that, like what happens in many organizations when something goes wrong, you have to find a scapegoat. You have to throw them under the bus. You would hope that they would be factual about it, but in this case, they weren't. So I sort of expected that would happen. But at the same time, I feel like just based on the information that I have retained in emails and in correspondence, that I can prove behind a shadow of a doubt that all of those accusations were false.
And yeah, I the more I learn about some of these people involved, and I was mentioning on the break that I've witnessed this, firsthand. It's pretty amazing. There are clearly no ethics involved or ethical standards in a lot of the upper echelon of this organization, in my opinion. But and so when things started to fall apart, to unravel with Bigelow. And things, what began to happen? And there obviously were some communications that were taking place behind your back that involved a couple key people. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, the relationship really started to go sour when we were coming upon the first contract review period, which was, I think, June of 2009, just a few months after it started. So within the contract, it basically stipulated, Bass is going to pay MUFON a fixed amount per month for investigative services. And then at this first review period, we're going to evaluate and then decide whether the contract should be terminated or we should continue with the same fixed price amount. And what happened was, come June, something entirely different happened. Bigelow made it very clear that he was not happy with the amount of information he was getting from MUFON, and that he felt like he wasn't getting his money's worth. And he was also very unhappy that the money that was given to MUFON at a fixed price each month was not all being spent on high quality investigation. Well, it only makes sense we can spend money for those investigations that qualify to be investigated. So if it took, for example, $25,000 in 1 month to investigate the cases for that month, but the amount we were receiving from Bigelow was $50,000, well, there was $25,000 extra in the bank. He didn't like the fact that MUFON was banking this extra money, which from a legal contractual point of view made absolutely no sense. It was a fixed price contract. And it states even in the contract that he was going to have no management oversight of MUFON and try to attempt to influence the organization. But the complete opposite happened. He basically was very adamant about every dollar that was given to MUFON had to go towards some investigation, which made, again, zero sense. So I fought back against that, and I told the board, this is ridiculous. Basically, Bass is already trying to invalidate their own contract. It states very clear what the terms are. So I think that come June, we should just terminate the contract and be done with it. Of course, the board didn't like that because they didn't want to lose their benefactor. They thought they had a long-term relationship with Bigelow at stake there. So they decided instead to bend to Bigelow's will. And they said, okay, fine, we'll amend the contract. Well, the contract never got amended. What happened instead was that Bigelow just stopped sending as much money. So rather than send us the $56,000 that was due every month, he started cutting the amounts illegally. Because per the contract, the one that was signed, he was supposed to pay us on a fixed price per month. So that started happening. He started cutting checks in half. And come the fall, he wanted more information from MUFON, whether that is take the money that you've accumulated and go out and spend it on advertising so more people know about MUFON and can therefore report more cases to you. He was trying to dictate how the money should be spent, again, going against what the contract. So all of this rubbed me the wrong way. And I had already told the board that I had decided not to continue as international director. The following year I was going to relinquish my role. And I also said, well, since you folks aren't listening to me, and you're bending to the will of Bigelow, well, then you should take over the contract negotiations. I am done with this. So I withdrew from the contract negotiations in terms of trying to be the front person for that. But being still on the board, I should still be notified of whatever they negotiated with Bigelow. Instead, they took an opposite approach. They decided that they were going to instead negotiate with Bigelow behind my back and try to put the blame on me for why the whole relationship was going sour. And when I found out about this, which was in January of 2010, the day I found out about it was the day I wrote my resignation letter, immediate resignation, and I left the organization.
Wow. That must have been, I can't imagine how stressful that must have been for you, and just to realize that all of these things were happening. And so what was Schuessler doing during this time frame? Did he step in to try to smooth the water, since he was the one who brought this lovely contract forward to MUFON?
He wasn't trying to smooth the waters as much as he was trying to keep the relationship with Bigelow. He and Bigelow had a long history. And this is not the first time that these relationships have gone sour. There was a relationship that happened between between Bigelow and what was called the UFO Coalition, which was the three different UFO organizations that had this sort of business relationship with Bigelow. Center for UFO Studies being one, and the Fund for UFO Research, and then also MUFON. And that whole relationship fell apart too. So I think John already was bitter about the fact that he had lost Bigelow as a benefactor back then, when that relationship with the three UFO organization coalition came together and then fell apart. So I think he didn't want a reoccurrence of that. But it's really hard to maintain relationship when someone's not keeping their side of the bargain.
Absolutely. And so, with regard to Skinwalker Ranch, you had mentioned in several blog posts that you could see right away that there was something that was wrong, and that Skinwalker Ranch was not what it was portrayed to be to the public. Can you give us more information about what really kind of raised your hackles on that, other than the fact that you tried to get access to the ranch? What were some of the other things that got you?
Sure. So what happened is that at the MUFON Symposium in 2009, which was August of 2009, Bigelow came to the symposium, which was kind of strange for him to show up. Kelleher was there. He brought Junior Hicks, who was one of the folks who worked on the ranch, and Dr. Frank Salisbury was also there giving a speech. And I sat down for lunch with Dr. Salisbury at the symposium and just started chatting with him, and found out that he was going to be putting out a second edition of his book called The Utah UFO Display, which he had written in the 70s, and which was all about the Uinta Basin and all of the strange UFO stories that happened there. And he had co-written this book with Junior Hicks, who was at the symposium. And I said, "Oh, so how do you plan on doing your rewrite?" He said, "Well, I plan on going around and re-interviewing people that I had interviewed before. I want to see if I can get on the Skinwalker Ranch and add that to the book." So I thought, "Oh, that's great. Why don't you let me tag along?" And he said, "Yeah, that would be great. I'd love for you to come along and help me with this." So I did that. I went to Utah, met up with Dr. Salisbury, but before I'd gotten there, Salisbury had already asked Bigelow, maybe at the symposium, I'm not sure when, if he could have access to the ranch, and Bigelow said no. So I told Dr. Salisbury, well, I'm the director of MUFON. Maybe with this MUFON-BASS relationship in place, maybe they'll let me on the ranch. So again, I asked Bigelow, and he said no. So he denied me 2 times, and he also denied Dr. Salisbury, but I wasn't going to waste my trip to Utah. I went out anyway and met up with Frank, and we spent our time instead interviewing the people around the ranch, the neighbors that were around the ranch, plus some of the original witnesses that were in his original book. Well, some very interesting things happened during that trip. 2 very, very important things, 2 major red flags that showed up, and that's when I thought, wait a minute, this Skinwalker Ranch is not what it's being portrayed as it is. There's something else going on here. So the first red flag that showed up was Dr. Salisbury told me, and this is in his book, his rewrite of the book, you can read it if you buy a copy, that he had found the brother of the original owners of the ranch, who just happened to live in Salt Lake City, not very far from where he lived. And he interviewed this guy. His name is Garth Myers. His sister, Edith Myers, was one of the original owners that owned it from 1930-something on, and then who ended up selling it to the Shermans, but it wasn't Edith who sold it. Edith passed away. And so it was up to Garth as the estate, the person who was responsible for the estate, to then get rid of the ranch, and that's how it ended up in the Shermans' hands. It was sold off to the Shermans as part of estate planning. And Dr. Salisbury asked Garth, well, was there any paranormal activity on the ranch that you're aware of? And he was adamant. He said, absolutely not. My siblings owned it from the 1930s. I've been on the ranch many times. Nothing has happened. Absolutely zero has happened that I'm aware of that's paranormal or UFO related. And I thought that was very strange. But then the other thing that was highly strange was that after Bigelow bought the ranch from the Shermans, Bigelow called up Garth Myers and said, hey, how come you're not telling everybody that there was all this high strangeness on the ranch when your sister owned it? And Garth said, well, that's because there was none. So why do we have Bob Bigelow, this billionaire aerospace entrepreneur, calling up not the Shermans, but the former owner, who really was the estate planner, who had to deal with the estate, and try to convince Garth that there was paranormal activity going on? Just very, very strange. Made no sense to me whatsoever.
It's interesting. Elaine Douglas, in her files, what little we have, because some of the best stuff is gone into the black abyss, but she mentioned that as well, the fact that Bigelow had called Garth Myers and tried to force him to say that there was paranormal activity at the ranch.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It simply makes no sense, other than some sort of psychological manipulation. But the second major red flag that I found out on that trip was talking to Junior Hicks, who had free access to the ranch. Junior told myself and Dr. Salisbury that back during the time when NIDS was investigating the ranch, Bigelow's former organization before Bass, that there was, I think it was a cattle mutilation that happened. And after that cattle mutilation, they found these strange metallic rods on the ranch. And one of the NID scientists, and Junior didn't reveal his name, told Junior that these rods that were found on the ranch were made of element 115. And that he knew they were element 115 because he himself, the scientist, had worked out at Area 51 on 300 pounds of this material. And that just set off a major siren and red flag for me, because that in a nutshell is the Bob Lazar story, which I think most people in ufology know to be just a bunch of bunk. So I found it so odd that a NID scientist was pushing the Bob Lazar mythology onto the ranch to Junior Hicks. And Junior had no reason to make this up or to lie about it. He seemed to be a very honest guy. And so again, another major red flag, this time tying in the mythology of Area 51.
And I can validate that story, because when I saw Junior Hicks, Chris and I went to go interview him a few months back, and he recounted that story that a NID scientist said, brought in the Bob Lazar Area 51 mythology. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, because that is what this faction has been steering, these mythologies, disinformation campaigns for a long time. But it was interesting to hear Junior say that. And we've got just a few minutes before we take a break, and there is something that you were out there and you were interviewing Charles Wynn. You were there for that interview. Correct. And I have had Charles's granddaughter on the show, and we've spent a great deal of time talking, because she was concerned, and she mentioned that things really started to happen, even though her grandfather lived in the area for decades, but things really started to happen as far as UFO, quote unquote, UFO sightings and paranormal occurrences, in 96, 97, conveniently. And so I wanted to go a little bit more in depth into that interview that you did with Charles Wynn, and also a little bit more with regard to Junior. But so you did, before we go to break, I mean, you went up there, you had these experiences, you saw these 2 red flags. What was your first thought about what was truly taking place there?
Well, it seemed to me that somebody was highly interested in using the ranch to promote mythology, UFO mythology, and to promote that UFO narrative for whatever reason. So I don't know the motivation behind it and why it was fixated on a particular piece of land, but between Bigelow trying to convince the former owners that something was going on, and then trying to draw in this Bob Lazar angle to it, just led me to believe this is just one big disinformation campaign.
Yeah, and absolutely it is. And it was interesting to me, and I think it's important to note that really, that you've got the Native American, beliefs and all these different things that are carefully crafted and interwoven into this, and you didn't really hear anything about this until that book came out. Hunt for the Skinwalker. And then all of a sudden, everybody's having these Skinwalker sightings and all of these things. And it just seems to me like this myth, this psychological operation was allowed to happen, and they could test so many things. And we're really going to dig into that, when we get back. But I really feel through my investigations that people are potentially being exposed to things that are harmful. We've seen on the new episode, the new TV show that's come out, that there is harmful radiation, so harmful that people are told not to be on the ranch. And then you've got, you throw into some of the things when Bass sent people in there, people that were in the military, defending our country, risking their lives, sent these people in there but wouldn't let the upper echelon of Bigelow on the ranch because they were going to get cancer and die. There's so many intriguing things, and I'm really excited to dig into this when we get back. I am Erica Lukes here with James Carrion. We will be back after the break.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
We interrupt this program to annoy you and make things generally irritating.
At the end of the day, we turn the lights down in the KCOR studio.
Oh, sweet.
And crank up the hottest club songs from around the world.
This is the future.
The Grind, mixed by Tina Marie, your Vegas vixen of the high desert.
What about the body? What kind of body?
Good body. Nice body.
Every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Pacific. The best 3 hours of commercial-free music.
New music first.
It's time to stand up and dance your ass off. The Grind, nightly and exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Come on, it's kind of hot.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 Million Miles Till Midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
There is a world outside that which we live in. A realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very moment.
The 1-hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
1, 2, 3, 4!
To the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds.
I love the music. Oh, I listen to.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to spend my Friday evenings with all of you. I can't thank my listeners, the support that I get. Northern UFOs, you are my rock. I just appreciate all of your work and your friendship. I want to give a shout out to Phil, who is another partner in Troublemaking Crime. And hopefully we'll have to get you back on really quick so we can have more discussions about MUFON and some interesting information. My guest tonight is somebody that has been really outspoken in the field and has taken a lot of heat because of some of the thoughts that he has had with regard to MUFON, the intelligence community, why and how there would be this major deception about UFOs over the decades. His name is James Carrion, and you can get both of his books, Anachronism and The Roswell Deception. They are on his website. Will you tell us one more time where we can find your website?
Sure. It's historydeceived.blogspot.com.
Perfect. And I'll be posting links to that. And so I highly recommend people get on there, pay attention to all of these things. These are important topics that James is bringing up. We were talking before we went to break about Skinwalker Ranch and two of the red flags that you had when you realized that things weren't what they were, apparently being rolled out as. I want to just stress this again because I find this really funny that Bigelow didn't want you on the ranch because he didn't want to draw attention to the ranch, and yet everything he did was drawing attention to the ranch. And I find that, that's about par for the course right there. You interviewed, when you were out there, you met with Junior Hicks. I have a great deal of respect for him, and also Dr. Frank Salisbury, and I was fortunate enough to talk to him a few times before he passed away. But you interviewed a man by the name of Charles Wynn. Can you tell us a little bit about that interview and some of the things that might have piqued your interest?
Yeah, so Mr. Wynn owns property on one side of the ranch. And we went over his house and sat down with him and his family and just had sort of a frank conversation about, had they seen anything strange, either on their property or on the Skinwalker property. And honestly, the things that Charles was telling us sounded more to do with some sort of electromagnetic effect, like he had seen some kind of ball lightning once. But there's nothing that stuck out in our interview that had to do with anything strange or paranormal or even UFO related. So it wasn't high strangeness. It just seemed to be possibly something of electromagnetic nature.
It's interesting because, I had Michelle, his granddaughter, on the show, and she recounted a time where her grandfather was out late at night and closing an irrigation canal, and that there was a bright beam of light. And this is something that other people had reported, including my husband, Chris Marks, that came over him, and it was so hot that he, had to take cover from that. What could that have been?
Well, I'm not sure what that could have been. I guess we have to talk about origin. So, beam of light, is it something from the Earth or maybe man-made? Could have been a laser. I don't know. I think what is odd, I think you mentioned this earlier in the show, is that all of the strange activity around Skinwalker seemed to have happened only after the Shermans bought it. So if there's a human deception element to it, then somebody is walking around the ranch creating these strange phenomena for whatever reason, I don't know, but to increase the mythology that surrounds the ranch, which only seemed to have started when the Shermans made their purchase.
And so do you think that, given some of the people that have been involved with Bigelow over the years, NIDS and different things, specifically you've got John Alexander, non-lethal weapons testing, some of the other people, and then also now you've got the solicitation sheet for OSAP, and there's specific mention of RF and DO weapons testing. Do you think that there was something on the ranch that they could have used this as a living laboratory to test some of these non-lethal weapons technologies?
Yeah, it's definitely plausible. If you look at some of the folks that were involved on the ranch, you have John Alexander, who has been known to have been involved with non-lethal weapons research. You have Dr. Hal Pudoff. It always seems like the folks that are involved with Bigelow fall into one of two different categories. Either they're what I call the usual suspects, which means that they have either a military/intelligence background, but they also have a high interest in ufology, and so they sort of straddle both worlds. That would be the Pudoffs and the Alexanders, for example, and the Kit Greens of the world. And then you have folks that seem to be adjusting for the high strangeness UFO side of it, like Jacques Vallée, for example, and John Schuessler. And I hate using this term, but I think it's probably the most appropriate. The folks that usually are on the ufology high strangeness side usually have a certain role to play, and which I call the useful idiot role, which usually means that they're the ones that are gullibly drawn into this and they're taken advantage of, and the narrative gets pushed through them, or they act as a gatekeeper to the rest of the community to push out this narrative, as we could see with John Schuessler being used in concealing the Bass benefactor. So maybe even the Tom DeLonges of the world are, serving that same role in To the Stars. But it just seems to be these two different categories of people that really shouldn't be mixing. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me that when we're dealing with a subject like this, that we really need the involvement of folks that have these real long histories with the intelligence community. Other than there's some ulterior motive there.
And so so you said it would be plausible that they could be actually, and this is my thought, and I'll just tell you this and see and get your feedback. But given what I know about Bigelow, it seems like he's a mogul, a real estate mogul, so he could have been just the owner of the property, and he could have had different contractors that could come in. They have this real life test scenario where they could test some of these technologies on people that were in the military. So they had different acclimations to things, and they were used to stressful situations. And so you're testing out this technology. You're looking at the reports that these people are generating and figuring out whether this technology works. Could that be a plausible thing? Because to me, looking at this, knowing what I know now, that's a lot more plausible than UFOs and all sorts of other things.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, we can look at the history of the intelligence community to know that they have a long history of doing surreptitious and hidden research on human subjects, going all the way back to MK Ultra, or even psychological manipulation testing and other things that have gone on. And sure, so it's possible they could use the UFO field to perform those same human subject experiments with basically perfect cover, right? Because who's going to question that they're doing this when it's being attributed to paranormal UFO activity?
Absolutely, and it's so interesting to me because it's just, you've got the book coming out and you've got this mythology, all these different things that were created, and then you've got people like Charles Wynn who are experiencing things. And after that specific sighting that he had, where he dove into the irrigation canal, he was very lethargic and very depressed. He had a lot of physical problems after that sighting. And I know that when Chris Marks and some of the people that worked for Bass were on the ranch, they were deployed to the ranch, they came back feeling absolutely drained. And as you know, they were also, sent to Reno, some interesting little clinic in Reno, to have MRIs. And some of the guards, the investigators, had to do urine samples. I mean, what in the world could that be about? Do you think that was because they were testing to see how these people were interacting with UAP?
Not exactly. I mean, I think I'm more in your camp, which is the non-lethal weapons testing, and it's not unheard of. I mean, we look what happened to our diplomats in Cuba, who some of them had serious brain damage from some sort of strange weapon that was used on them, some frequency weapon, something that had to do with, manipulating chemicals in their brain. So there's probably all kinds of non-lethal weapons testing going on around the world, not only within our country, but definitely in Russia and China and so on. So not wanting to be behind the curve, I'm sure we are definitely doing some of that on our own. And at some point you have to test it out on humans, and maybe this was one way they did it.
And I definitely think so. It's been funny to see, some of the people that have come out of the woodwork like they usually do, the useful idiots, I guess. And, they're saying, of course, we would never, our government would never do anything like that. They stopped doing that in the 60s. And you just think, seriously? Either you have a very low IQ or you're working on their team. I mean, it's just, it's so crazy to me.
You're way too trusting of the government. It's, there are a lot of bad actors everywhere. But, there's a certain reality to it. I mean, if we look at the history of the Cold War, there was a lot of things that happened during the Cold War that were not ethical, not moral. But given that we were facing the Soviets and, our arch enemy, and the nuclear holocaust was at stake, a lot of folks look at that in these intelligence agencies and say, well, I don't like the idea of doing this, but, it's progress from our perspective just to be able to have one up on the enemy.
Absolutely. And I think it's been interesting because both Chris Marks and Chris Bartell, who worked for Bass, I mean, they both said that, yes, they understand that we need to do this. This is the safety and security of our people. But the big problem that they had was whether it was UAP or non-lethal weapons testing, they were put into a situation where they were not asked, they did not consent to some of these things. And I think it's the really kind of important thing to stress there. I don't know. I mean, when you look at all of this and you look at specifically Skinwalker Ranch and you look at the publicity and the narrative that has been promoted over the years, I mean, what is because we're getting ready to wrap up the show, but what is just a brief capsule of what your thoughts are on Skinwalker Ranch?
What's interesting you asked, because I just finished watching the second episode of the History Channel show that aired recently, which I'm not impressed with at all. It seems to me, honestly, that it might as well be ghost hunting on the property, because it has that same feel when you're watching one of these ghost hunting shows of, dramatic events that aren't really dramatic and don't really lead to anywhere, or there's no answers. It just seems for dramatic effect. So that aside, if we look at Skinwalker and we focus on the red flags that are there, the major red flag being no paranormal activity before the Shermans. Another major red flag being this trying to tie in UFO mythology from Area 51. Those are things that you really can't just overlook those red flags. And I think this is the big problem that folks have in ufology in general, whenever they're conducting an investigation, is that because they are at heart, a lot of them believers, which taints their investigation and makes them biased, they tend to ignore these red flags. You cannot ignore these red flags. Those are there, and that they tell you a story, and that story is that this ranch is just a mundane piece of property. And there's nothing going on that's of a paranormal nature, I don't believe, or of a supernatural nature, or of a UAP. Somebody is manufacturing this mythology. And if you start from there, and you work your way forwards from there, from that hypothesis, then the onus is going to be on those claiming the opposite, being the George Knapps and the Colin Kelleher's of the world, to prove it. And the problem is they cannot prove it. Why can they not prove it? Because all the data they've gathered through NIDS or through BASS is sitting where? Not in the public domain. It's sitting in somebody's vault, in somebody's file cabinet, probably in a government agency somewhere, rotting away. So all you are left with is mythology.
And so what do you think about, there was this 500-page report, and, we've got the To the Stars and all of this Luis Elizondo and different things and people promoting, all of this. I mean, what do you think about that? What is taking place? Is that just another manipulation of public opinion?
Absolutely. I think it's about controlling the narrative. I think that as we've seen in the history of ufology, there are certain elements within the intelligence agencies that are using this field for their own purpose, and in order to maintain that, they need to be able to control the narrative at will. And one way to control that narrative is to be able to be the folks behind the mythology, the ones collecting the data for the mythology, which we're never going to see the light of day. Just like we haven't seen the NIDS data or the BASS data. I doubt we're going to see this report that was given to the DIA that some researchers say they've seen, but we'll never see it. And I would love to see it, actually, because I would bet that if we took that 500-something page report and compared it to the reports MUFON was sending in when they were part of this MUFON-BASS relationship, you're going to see probably a large amount of the data was coming from MUFON. So when Bigelow was making his assertions that he wasn't getting his money's worth out of MUFON, well, that would be a little disingenuous if it turns out this report is largely based on that.
And that, yes, it will be very interesting to see where that rolls out. But luckily, I mean, they've got a lot of people that have popped up out of the woodwork who are, and that's another interesting thing. I just have to say, I'm amazed. When To the Stars rolled out, all of a sudden you had these people that appeared out of nowhere. These bloggers, these people that were, trying to get in there on social media and trying to browbeat people that had differing opinions or were actually questioning things that they should be questioning. And it's just fascinating to me to see the way this rolls out. But go ahead.
I think if you want to understand how they control the narrative, it's actually very simple. Just like sex sells, high strangeness sells. We can see that, there's a million UFO-themed shows on TV that get high ratings because people love the mystery. They love the high strangeness. And oftentimes, they don't care that at the end of each show, there are no answers. It's the thrill of the discovery or the thrill of the pursuit without actually getting to truth. And for folks like me who are only interested in truth and have problems with that approach, we're the ones that are sort of sitting there on the very mundane and boring side of data collection and critical thinking and critical analysis that simply can't compete with that. There's a reason why there's, season 8 of The Curse of Oak Island, and they've been digging a hole in this island for the last 8 years and haven't found what everybody's looking for. People don't seem to care that they haven't found anything. They just like the fact that they're still digging away at it. And I think the same's happening here within ufology, as folks are enamored of this. And at some point, there's no interest in finding truth. It's more about, let's just keep perpetuating this mystery and this high strangeness because it makes life exciting.
And so what would you say to the people that have been out near the ranch or been on the ranch and they've seen things that defy logic? I mean, what would you say to them?
Well, maybe they're being manipulated. Maybe, you don't have to go very far to just go to Las Vegas, right? Go to any magic show, and you can be deceived, and you're being deceived because it's a magic show. Now imagine you find yourself in a setting where those same manipulations are going on, but you actually think it's real. It's not that hard to deceive the human mind, given the right set of circumstances and the right technologies.
And I agree. And it's hard because I know, for myself, I've seen things. That's why I fell in love with this and I wanted to learn more. I've seen things that I can't explain. And you have stated several times throughout the show that there is something genuine there and that it is unfortunate that, you've got people that are steering the narrative and manipulating people. And I think that's the important thing to really stress. You're not, they're like Frank Salisbury and Junior Hicks. They have documented things over the decades, and there were people that had experiences in the Uinta Basin, whatever that is. But what are your closing thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of what I call the spectrum of belief. So when you're looking at belief, at one end of the spectrum, there are those who are just die-hard believers. Their minds are made up. They believe that UFOs exist, that alien races are coming to visit us, and therefore much of what is UFO related that shows up on TV or in different reports has to be that. Their minds are completely made up, and therefore it drives their investigations and it drives their own confirmation bias. On the opposite end of that, you have hardcore debunkers. These are the folks like the folks from CSIOPS, I think is what they're called now, the Center for Skeptical Inquiry. These are the folks that don't want to hear about UFOs at all because they already have their mind made up too. It's either people misperceiving something or people lying or creating hoaxes or whatever. They pay no attention to data, even if it may be genuine data. They simply don't have the time of day for it because their minds are completely made up. They're at the opposite end of the spectrum. In order to get to the truth, you got to be in the middle. You got to be open-minded. You have to be willing to entertain the thought that, yes, there could be something definite and real and highly strange going on, worthy of investigation, worthy of discovery and pursuit. But you better have a very highly critical mind, and you better be willing to take a hard and serious look at red flags and make sure you focus on those first before you go to the strange explanation or the paranormal explanation. You have to rule out the mundane first. And with all the human deception that's been going on in this field for so long, you better spend your time there first before you can actually get to the heart of the data.
And absolutely, and I think it's important because, like I want to just say, because there is, there are a couple of people in the chat room right now who have had experiences out near the ranch, and it's difficult because this is a polarizing issue. But I want to just say you have never accused anybody of lying about reporting what they've seen. Had you? You never would have been in MUFON. You wouldn't have been the international director of MUFON if that was your stance on things. So
no, absolutely not. I think, but a lot of what people are reporting are of an anecdotal nature. A lot of times they believe that they've seen something, and you have to take, their word for it. But at the same time, if they are showing some sort of pattern of lying for other reasons or of deception, well, that's going to taint whatever information they provide. So, aside from the folks that are in your chat room that have had these personal experiences, if we just look at the man behind the ranch, Mr. Bigelow, he's lied to my face about who his sponsor is. So that red flag in and of itself tells me he's not trustworthy, and therefore neither is his data trustworthy.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. And he's lied to a lot of people, including people that trusted him, that worked for him, and he's put people in harm's way. And I think that at the end of the day, is an important, point. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, because you could understand, you were there firsthand to see what was taking place with MUFON, to see what was taking place with Bigelow, and you raised questions about Skinwalker Ranch, and we have to, yes, is there something genuine out there? Of course, but is this what we're seeing taking place in the Uinta Basin, specifically at the ranch? We don't know, but what we do know is there are high levels of radiation that are dangerous to people, so we need to look at human, perhaps this could be, I don't know. This could be humans that are at play here. We need to look at that. And thank you for bringing that up, James. This has been a great show, and I definitely need to have you back. Everybody has been saying that we need to have more shows, and just I really appreciate it. And I hope that you and your family are safe throughout all of this. I'll be posting links to your website. I hope all of you are safe. Take care. Stick around for a great night on KCOR. We will catch you next Friday.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack